Asia Times, 3rd of August 2023, developing stronger commercial relations with Sri Lanka in opposition to Chinese imperialism. As part of its all-out battle against the Indian subcontinent, China has entangled smaller countries in debt, particularly those around India. Chinese debt-trapping policy has a very negative impact on Sri Lanka. Ranil Wickremesinghe, the president of Sri Lanka, left India with an ambitious plan for increased bilateral connections. The trip was another milestone in the new alliance between India and Sri Lanka established in 2022. Still, expanding supply chains, signing complete free trade agreements, and improving central bank collaboration are all necessary for forging closer economic links. The economic component of the bilateral relationship was stressed in the joint statement released following the meeting on July 21. Bilateral economic cooperation has previously been hampered by India's security worries regarding China's involvement in Sri Lanka, disagreements over fisheries, and the unresolved issue of ethnic reconciliation. But after Sri Lanka's economy entered an economic crisis in April 2022 and the island nation defaulted on its international debt, India took a key neighborhood-first role by providing the country with $4 billion in foreign aid. This time, the plan goes beyond government to government. The alliance promotes cooperative partnerships between Indian and Sri Lankan businesses and private sector investment. The three sectors that this cooperation focuses on are logistics, energy, and tourism. This includes enhancing regional logistics, expanding Colombo, Trincomalee, and Kankasanthurai ports, providing ferry services between Sri Lankan and Indian ports, and increasing aviation connectivity between the two nations. These commercial investments also make it possible for people to move about. Energy participation on both sides is essential. The most significant initiatives include plans to connect the two nations' electrical systems and construct an oil pipeline connecting India and Sri Lanka. With Bangladesh and Nepal, India already has oil pipelines and electrical connections, providing a model that can be used in Sri Lanka. India imports energy and has a thriving global oil processing and refining industry. Due to India's economies of scale, Sri Lanka will benefit from cheaper petroleum by being connected to the Indian oil grid. Fuel shortages in Sri Lanka, expected in 2022 due to low foreign exchange reserves, might be lessened. Paying Indian oil in rupees would likely reduce exchange rates and more accessible trade credits. The electrical grids being connected will also perhaps be transformational. India's reliance on domestic coal production and local expertise makes its electricity among the least expensive in the world. Sri Lanka can overcome its electricity constraints and expand its wind energy trade potential with the help of dependable and reasonably priced Indian power. The Indian power grid can then be supplied with this reliable but dirty electricity. Sri Lanka is also attempting to use India's well-known, open-source digital public infrastructure, which aids in the digital delivery of crucial government services. Small enterprises and tourists in Sri Lanka can use digital payments in rupees by operationalizing India's unified payment interface and using the Indian currency to settle bilateral transactions. The takeoff has started, but 3 additional business-oriented alignments must now be pursued to integrate bilateral trade effectively. Sri Lanka must first be incorporated into India's developing supply chain infrastructure. South Asian nations pay less per hour than China does. But like their counterparts in China, South Asian companies are adaptable and willing to accept small orders. South Asia must now work to reduce the high trade costs currently impeding firms by pursuing greater trade openness, bettering the region's infrastructure for trade and transportation, and reducing behind-the-border laws to compete. After reforms are implemented, South Asia might establish regional manufacturing clusters and export processing zones along a well-oiled supply chain. Globalizing in South Indian states, Sri Lankan businesses should make investments. Companies like Brandix, Dilma, and John Keel's Holdings should invest in tea, tourism, textiles, and food manufacturing. India and Sri Lanka can actively encourage bilateral foreign direct investment flows by enhancing investor outreach, easing FDI entrance restrictions, and streamlining bureaucracy through digitization. It would also be crucial to reopen the Economic and Technology Cooperation Agreement negotiations as soon as possible to advance regional commerce and FDI governed by laws. The goal should be a high-standard trade agreement adopting 21st-century trade norms to enable deeper integration through supply chains and service trade. Both nations are now aware that trade liberalization measures will benefit them more. These include investments in infrastructure and transportation, a projected land bridge, and harmonization of regulations and logistics. To avoid a reaction from lost industries and small businesses in Sri Lanka, the asymmetry between India and Sri Lanka's economic strengths must be considered during discussions. Improved coordination between central banks is also essential. An early warning system for economic crises and frequent consultations between Sri Lankan and Indian private bank officials are required. Following the Asian financial crisis of 1997, the ASEAN group of nations established a mutual monitoring system to look for early warning indicators, notify others of possible crises, and coordinate assistance across member nations. A bilateral system between India and Sri Lanka could serve as a model for the rest of South Asia. Another area is an improved program for building capacity at the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Delhi is home to the IMF's Center for Economic Capacity Building in South Asia for training and technical assistance. It can be expanded to offer further training in macroeconomic management and financial stability with Indian assistance. For regional stability, these institutional processes are essential. The Modi-Wickremesinghe discussions created the groundwork for a new trajectory in India and Sri Lanka based on more intense economic relationships that both governments have supported. East Asia's experience demonstrates that market-led regionalism is the practical path to wealth and growth in the future.